policy, the tools used by the central bank to control the quantity of money in the economy.
So what's the meaning of monetary policy in Arabic?
ضوابط رقابية?
No.
I don't know, doctor, to be honest.
What's the
I know
meaning?
the exact Arabic, but not the financial Arabic translation.
Okay. So again, monetary related to money. So what's the meaning of monetary policy in Arabic?
السياسة النقدية دكتور.
Well done, well done. Okay. So in the similar way, the central bank during recession has to increase the quantity of money supplied, while during inflation, the central bank has to decrease the quantity of money supplied. How? By using some tools. So I will not give more details because chapter 9 is concerned about monetary policy. But here the idea, the central bank should increase or decrease the quantity of money supplied to affect the liquidity, to fight recession or inflation, similar to fiscal policy. Supply side policies, this is direct policies, try to affect supply side, not demand side. So how, for example, the government can decrease taxes on some companies to decrease their production costs, so that will encourage them to produce more and hire more. That will stimulate or activate the level of economic activity. So we can distribute seeds to farmers for free to decrease the production cost. As the production cost decreases, that will give them an incentive to increase output. But during inflation, during expansion, I will delete, I will cancel such policies because I need to soften the pressure on my resources. So here, what's the idea in this slide? I will come back to Lana and she will read this slide for me.
Yes.
Lana, each slide you read, I will give you 5 marks.
Thank you.
So calculate how many marks you earn during this session.
Macroeconomics focuses on 4 groups: households and firms, which together compose the private sector, the government or the public sector, and the rest of the world, the international sector.
Okay, so to be able to analyze macroeconomic problems, I will divide the society into 4 players because we are concerned about the whole country. So I will divide the society into 4 players. The first one, households or consumers as one group. This is family sector. The second one, business sector, firms, producing units, or we call it private sector. And the private sector in free enterprise economy, such as UAE, is the main body to produce goods and services. And we depend on the private sector to formulate the level of economic activity. And the third player, the government. Sometimes we call it the public sector. Also, the government has an important role affecting the level of economic activity, especially in oil producing and exporting countries such as UAE. The government has an important role affecting the level of economic activity. So recently, last week, there was a debate in America about stimulus, a huge stimulus, to a huge amount to be injected in the economy to fight recession and public families against coronavirus pandemic. The fourth player, the international sector or the rest of the world. We interact with the rest of the world via export and imports. I will put these four players in a diagram called circular flow. What's the meaning of circular flow in Arabic? Circular flow. Flow as a movement. Flow, do you know flow movement of something as movement of water in a river? So, for example, I receive a salary in the end of each month. This is flow of my salary. So circular flow in Arabic.
تدفق الدائري دكتور.
Well done, mashallah. Your dictionary is perfect. What's your name?
Muhammad Adnan.
Muhammad Adnan. Well done, Muhammad Adnan. Okay, let me go to Farhane. Farhana is absent, seems to be, or she's busy. Let me go to Raja.
Yes, Doctor.
Are you Raja?
Yes.
Okay, could you read this for me?
Okay. Circular flow, a diagram showing the income received and payments made by each sector of the economy.
Okay, so I will put in a diagram the four players in the macroeconomy, and I will see the movement of dirhams or dollars, not the movement of goods, the receipt and payments, the movement of dirhams or dollars. Okay. So see here, I put here the interaction between, so maybe I will give you a question, explain circular flow of payments. And see, this is my explanation to the circular flow of payments. The first interaction between firms and households. In a free enterprise economy, we assume that the general public or the households own all the resources, available in the society, such as capital, labor, and land. So they rent these resources to business sector to be used to produce goods and services. Instead, see here the arrow, instead, the firms has to pay rewards to households for using their own resources. For example, they will pay wages to those people who's working somewhere. So assume, for example, Lane, as a consumer, works in farms owned by Muhammad Adnan. So Muhammad Adnan will pay wages to Lane. Assume Lane is a landlord and she rent the land to Muhammad Adnan. Muhammad Adnan has to pay the rent. Assume Lana is the owner, so she will receive from her farm the profit. Maybe it's complicated. So in one view, I look at Lana as a consumer. In another view, I look at her as a manager of the farm. So she has to pay to the owner of the company the profit. And interest, dividends, this is all these forms of income received by households by participating in a production process. Let me add another arrow. So see here, Lana works in Muhammad Adnan farms and she received her wages. What she do with her wages? She will spend her wages to purchase goods and services. For example, Muhammad Adnan is producing tomatoes. Lana, she will pay 5 dirhams to receive a kilo of tomatoes. So day by day, Muhammad Adnan will be rich by receiving 5 dirhams, and Lana, her skin will be changed into red by eating much tomatoes. Do you agree, Lana?
Yes, because I'm paying every day 5 dirhams.
Okay. Let me add the government. Let me add the government. The government first collect money, which is called revenues. In most countries, revenues takes the shape of taxes. We have 2 kinds of taxes. This is called indirect taxes or production taxes, or as we call it in the UAE, value-added taxes. So it should be paid by firms. For example, Muhammad Adnan sold 1 kilo of tomatoes, so he has to pay 5% of its price to the government. This is value-added taxes. And also there is another form of taxes. It's not imposed in the UAE, which is called direct taxes or income taxes. For example, Lana received a salary of 1,000 dirhams, and she has to pay direct or income taxes 10%. So her salary is 1,000 dirham, she has to pay 100 dirham as direct taxes. So her disposable income will be only 900, and she can use 900 between consumption and saving. And okay, so the government collected some money. She will spend the money. First, she will pay to firms for purchasing goods and services. For example, the government will buy medicine to their hospitals. The government can make a contract with a construction company to build a school. So we are buying a building. And in the same time, the government has to pay money to households. We have at least 2 kinds of payments. The number 1 is called wages. Assume Farhana works in government office, so she will receive her salary. And also the government pays something called transfer payments for poor people, for voluntary families, not instead of participation in the production process. Let me add the rest of the world. So see here, UAE has to pay money to the rest of the world. For example, to America. For what? For purchasing of foreign-made goods and services, which is called import. Since we import, for example, cars from Japan, so we have to pay money to the Japan. And also the rest of the world, such as Japan, will pay money for us. For what? For purchasing of domestically made goods and services by foreigners. For example, a Japanese company will buy oil from us, which is called export. We export oil. So we receive money. Let me ask you a question if you understand this diagram. Salim works in Skyline, and I just 2 weeks ago, I received my last salary. Which arrow represents that Salim received his salary?
Farms to households?
Farms, household. Yeah, okay.
So again, Muhammad Adnan?
Firms to
From
households.
farms to households.
Okay. So from firms to household. So Skyline pays money. Salim received the salary. So assume Lana is a student at Skyline, and she just paid tuition fees to register some courses in the spring semester. Which arrow represents that?
From households to firms?
MashaAllah, from household to firms. This arrow represents payment by Lana to Skyline for purchasing educational services. Okay, it's clear. So let me go to Ali Abdurrahman. Ali Abdurrahman couldn't hear me. Let me go to Maryam.
Yes, doctor.
Are you Maryam?
Yes.
Okay, read this for me.
Transfer payments, cash payments made by the government to people who don't not supply goods, service, or labor in exchange for these payments. They include social security benefits, veterans benefits, and welfare payments.
Okay, so what is transfer payments? It is payments made by the government to some poor families, such as welfare payments. Those people cannot survive without support. So those people don't work in governmental offices. So they got it as a gift from the government. So we call it transfer payments. So we need to separate it in a special place in the calculation of aggregate output. Now, how to study, how to analyze macroeconomic problems? I explained it yesterday. First, we need to use tools of microeconomics, such as market clearing model, such as supply and demand model or curves. But unfortunately, we cannot depend totally on macroeconomic tools, because as we show you during a Great Depression, classical economics or microeconomists failed to explain why the unemployment or excess supply of labor existed for a long period of time. It seems to be prices are not flexible. We found prices are sticky and cannot move easily down to maintain equality between quantity demanded and quantity supplied. So it seems to be equilibrium in macroeconomy cannot guaranteed by invisible hand or demand and supply powers. For this reason, we need to add new tools, macroeconomic tools, to explain macroeconomic problems, such as the existence of unemployment for a long period of time, and design public or government policies, such as fiscal and monetary policies, to bring back the economy into equilibrium. So the new tools, the most important one, aggregate demand. So this is a new term, but it is very important term. So let me, Maryam, please, could you continue?
Okay. Aggregate demand and aggregate supply. Aggregate demand, the total demand for goods and services in economy. Aggregate supply, the total supply of goods and service in an economy.
Okay, so just sit, relax, and try to understand these concepts. You don't have to memorize them. So first, we need to understand what's the meaning of aggregate output. Aggregate output, total quantity of goods and services produced in a country such as UAE in 1 year. So this is quantity produced. What is aggregate supply? Willingness, desire by business sector to produce certain amount of goods and services under special circumstances. So again, aggregate output, goods produced. Aggregate supply, this is potential. This is a desire, willingness to produce something. If the conditions changed, business sector will change his decision to produce something else. Okay, we have another term called aggregate expenditure. What's the meaning of aggregate expenditure? Total amount spent by 4 players, households, firms, government, and the rest of the world or international sector, to buy goods and services produced domestically within a year. So again, what's the meaning of aggregate expenditure? Total amount spent by main players in our economy to purchase goods and services produced in our country within a year. What is aggregate demand? Willingness, desire to spend money to purchase goods and services under special circumstances. So for example, during coronavirus pandemic, aggregate demand decreases sharply. The willingness, the desire to spend money decreases. So for example, people postpone purchasing new cars because they are afraid about the future. The confidence of consumers injured. Okay. So we will use aggregate demand and aggregate supply in this model. So this is a very simple model. This is a very simple model to show the equilibrium in our economy. So in a given year, we produce a given amount. So why we produce this given amount of aggregate output? Due to the interaction between aggregate demand and aggregate supply. I think it's clear the aggregate demand slopes downward represent negative relationship with overall price level, while aggregate supply represents upward slope or positive relationship between aggregate supply and overall price level. The intersection point refers to equilibrium. So in this year, the overall price level, the price index is at P apostrophe, and this is the equilibrium level of output. So this is just very simple story in the introduction of macroeconomics. Later, we will build a modern, more practical model to show equilibrium in macroeconomics. So this is a historical business cycle in America during a long period of time. So it seems to be during a Great Depression, it is a huge decline in aggregate output over a long period of time, but sometimes there is short decline, which is called recession. So the drop in aggregate output here because of recession and the depression is a huge decrease in aggregate output. It seems to be the war such as Second World War bring expansion to the economy because the government spends more money. So First World War or Second World War brought expansion. So here, first oil shock, we explained it last class, when oil decided to increase the price of crude oil, production cost increases in America and Europe, and that brought a recession, a decrease in aggregate output. Okay, so these slides are important. These slides are important. These slides are important. Let me take a rest for a couple of minutes, and then I will come back, explain the phases of a business cycle. I explain it, I will not explain again. So from truth, go to expansion, and then peak, go down to recession, and then truth. So this is the curve of business cycle. And we have something called trend growth, recessionary gap, expansionary gap, how to use policies to tackle. So this is the idea. This is the talk. See here the answer of this question. There is no precise answer, but maybe you can find the definition of recession and expansion in the slides. But the whole story, how to explain the phases of a business cycle, you cannot find it. What's the meaning of a trough? The bottom or minimum point in the phase of business cycle. What's the meaning of peak? It is a maximum or the top point in the phase of business cycle. What's the meaning of expansion? Recession, expansion related to inflation. Recession is related to unemployment. So as the economy recovery goes up from trough to the intersection point with the trend, the unemployment rate decreases like this. Let's go to the second question, and I need to explain it. There's two managers. One is called nice, and another one is called tough. Muhammad Adnan.
Yes, Doctor.
Could you help me with the second question? Could you read the second question?
Okay, Doctor. Assume there are two managers that have very different ideas about how to deal with the recessions. Mr. Nice Guy believes in keeping workers during an economic downturn and does so by getting all of his workers to agree the wages cuts. Mr. Tough Guy believes that their best policy is to lay off workers and keep the wages of the remaining workers unchanged. Compare and contrast these two methods of dealing with an economic downturn, which is likely to be more profitable for the firm, and why?
Why? Okay.
Why?
So let me explain the question first. So downturn means recession. Downturn or recession. So downturn, recession, contraction, or slump. All these words are exchangeable. So I think two policies were adopted in the UAE during coronavirus pandemic. So Mr. Nice is not going to fire people, to kick them out, to lay off his labor force. It seems to be he's nice, he's kind. He agreed with them to cut their wages. For example, he has 10 employees. All of them agreed to cut their wages by 40%. This is a strategy. The second one, who's tough, said, no, I'm going to fire. I also have 10 employees. I'm going to fire 4 and keep the salaries unchanged. So both of these 2 policies were adopted in the UAE. Which one is better? Which one is better? Which one, do you know which is better for who? Is better for the total profit of the company, not for you as an employee. So for example, I used to work in Al-Ain University for 12 years. And because some reasons, one of them coronavirus pandemic, they fired me, they kicked me out. So immediately I looked for another job. Fortunately, I got a job in Skyline. But during coronavirus pandemic, during recession, it will be more difficult for you to get another job soon. Okay. Now, which one is better? We will not waste our time.
Mr. Nice Guy, sir.
I said, do you know, when I used to work in Al-Ain University, do you know, I blamed the president. I said, why he kicked me out? He should cut our wages. So, for example, cut our wages by 20%, all of us. We can manage our life with 80% of our salaries. And after coronavirus, we will return back to our normal work. So this is my view as an employee. But my president decided to fire me. He thought this policy is better for his company or his university. Let's see the model answer for this question. Muhammad Adnan.
Yes, doctor.
Go ahead.
Both methods are a way of cutting the total labor costs. The first does so by cutting wages, and the second does so by laying workers off.
Okay, so now number 1, both methods decreases total wages payment. For example, if we cut 40% of our salary by Mr. Nice, or fire 4 persons and unchange the salaries, the decrease in total wages. For example, my salary is 1,000, her salary is 2,000, the total wages is 3,000. So if you 2 policies will lead to the same result as a decrease in total wages. This is number 1. Let's go, Muhammad Adnan, number 2.
From Mr. Tough Guy?
Go ahead, read the text.
There is a difference, however, in terms of the workers that remain in each case. Mr. Nice Guy will likely be left with more marginal workers as the more productive workers seek work elsewhere.
Okay, now you should listen to me and understand this paragraph, because this paragraph is not so clear. See here, in general, assume Mr. Nice has 10 workers. Their productivities are not the same. For example, the productivity of the first one, 100 units per hour. The productivity of the second worker, 90 units, down to, let's say, 30 units. Okay, so what Mr. Nice did, which is not good, he decreases the salaries of all employees, whether their productivity is high or low. So what is the scenario? Most probably, those with high productivity may look for another job, So he may lose some employees with higher productivity, so the one whose productivity is 100 or 90, he may look for another job. He doesn't accept the decrease in his salary. The view will be clear if we go down to Mr. Tuff, Muhammad Adnan.
Yes, doctor. Mr. Tough Guy, by contrast, will be able to decide which workers he lets go and will likely choose his least productive workers. He will then be left with a more productive workers. This strategy is likely to be more profitable.
Okay, see here, Mr. Guy, what he did. He fired 4 persons with the least productive workers, with the least productivity. So, for example, the productivity 30, 35, 40, 45. So those people with the lowest productivity, he fired them, and he kept people with higher productivity with their salaries unchanged. This policy will be more profitable to the organization. And this matter is debatable. Maybe, do you know, this is in the short run. So in the long run, this is another story. This is another story.
Doctor,
So-
maybe he has another point of view.
Just a moment. I will listen to you. Just a moment. I will listen to you. So what is the main idea here? Assume each one has 10 workers. Keep in your mind, their productivity is not the same. Start with the base productivity, such as 100 units per hour, to the least productivity, such as 30 units per hour. Should you decrease? So here the model answer said, firing, even it is painful, but it will save the company, and it will save the profit of the company. Because see here, during coronavirus, for example, most commercial banks attacked by coronavirus, their activities became much lower than before. So their profit decreases. So the owners of the stakeholders of these banks, the shareholders of these banks, demanding profit. So they have to survive. They have. Let me add one paragraph here, as Hamdan said. This strategy is applicable in the short run. But if we look to this policy in the longer run, it may be dangerous or harmful, because I will lose part of my staff, and it may be very difficult for me to compensate them, because other companies, they will take them because they have experience in this industry. So please, Hamdan, don't forget to add this comment to your answer. So now just I'm explaining to you how to answer such questions in the exam. So try to add comments, try to add examples. So what is the example? I said Mr. Nice has 10 workers with the productivity moving from 100 units per hour down to 30. This is an example, to 30 units per hour. So use examples. Also, I mentioned a hard drop of the activity of a commercial bank, and they have to make brave decisions. This is another example. So all my explanation is part of the model answer to get A. But if you copy paste from slides, your degree will be around F and D. I will not give you A. I will give A to those students who show me their deep understanding. Hopefully it's clear. Let's move forward. We have now another question. Ali Hassan?
Yes, doctor.
Go ahead.
When there is unemployment, there is an excess supply of workers. Describe how microeconomic theory explains the response to this phenomenon. What is your view?
Okay, so I will not read the answer now. I already explained using demand and supply curve. And I said just again quickly, market demand curve for labor and aggregate supply curve for labor force. Assume the wage rate is above equilibrium. So then we will have excess supply of labor, which is called unemployment. According to macroeconomic theory, the wage rate, which is the price of labor, will drop down. As price decreases, quantity supply decreases, quantity demanded increases. At equilibrium point, there will be equality between quantity demand and quantity supply. This model is fair. What is my view? The Keynesian view. During the Great Depression, the wage rate didn't change to keep equality. The unemployment or excess supply of labor continues over 10 years. What is the idea of Mr. Keynes? Mr. Keynes said, it's not the prices of wage rate to determine the unemployment. So which variable will determine the unemployment? Said the aggregate demand. So it's a matter of the decrease in aggregate demand caused the unemployment, because as aggregate demand decreases, business sector decreases less and they fire people. To rescue the situation, to decrease the unemployment rate, the government should implement fiscal policy by injecting more money. Aggregate demand will increase, business sector will produce more and hire more, the unemployment rate will decrease. So I explained microeconomic view and macroeconomic view to the unemployment problem. Now we have two questions. Explain, Ali Hassan, read the question.
Yes, doctor. Explain the three different types of government policies that can be used to influence the macroeconomy.
We explain it in details: fiscal policy, monetary policy, supply side policies. Ali Hassan.
Yes, doctor. Explain what types of fiscal policies Keynes recommended when the economy was in A, recession, and B, inflation.
Let me see. Okay, I didn't put it here. So during, also we explain it. During recession, we have to implement expansionary fiscal policy by increasing government expenditure and decreasing taxes. During inflation, we have to implement recessionary fiscal policy or tighten or decrease the government expenditure and increase taxes. So for a business cycle, I put this table with numbers, and this is the model answer, the short answer. Just I make comment on the numbers. So in the first year, first quarter, second quarter, third quarter, fourth quarter, and so on. And this question, we explain it already. This question, we explain